Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This week, we welcome writer Dakota Brown to the podcast to discuss his comics, Death Comes for the Toymaker, as well as Grandma Tilly's Hell-Tech Mech, and so much more. Before you listen to this episode, though, be sure to go over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky and follow us, as well as listen, rate, review, all those things over on Apple, Spotify, and all your major podcasting platforms. This episode is Dakota Brown, writer of Death Comes for the Toymaker at Scout Comics and Grandma Tilly's Hell-Tech Mech over at Band of Bards. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, Dakota?
Doing well. How are you on this fine Tuesday? Hopefully that doesn't give away that this might not be live if it's...
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
It is raining and cold, and I live in Maine, and it's it's like borderline ready for its first snow, which is crazy because we were in shorts and a t-shirt on Saturday outside with my son running around like it was no tomorrow, like just beautiful. And then it dropped to like 40 degrees the next day, and now it's just crap. So we're into the winter.
I completely understand. It's Chattanooga Falls. I guess just like ubiquitous to the South in general. It's going to be, the 40s and 30s in the morning, but it's in the 80s by the time you're, coming home after a day of work. It's unpredictable. Well, it's predictable in that it's not predictable. It's not easy to plan your day around.
Well, one of my favorite seasons in Maine is the fall, and I feel like we just skipped it. It was here we go. Here's this beautiful day out. We carved pumpkins with my son and my best friend at their house with the garage door open. It was beautiful, and then I'm like, nice. Well, the pumpkins are going to survive because they're going to be frozen. You know what I mean? Like your carved pumpkins are going to be able to be there till December because of the fact that they're actually not going to decay in the heat. But yeah, it's been an interesting weather weekend into today. So. But no, it's nice. I'm excited to talk comics. That's what one of those things that it's been a really shitty week in Maine.
I'm so sorry.
And it's just like, it's nice to just be able to escape the real world and talk about something that's not actually in the real world, which is, I guess the comics themselves are in the real world, but the comic stories are not. So obviously it's the first time you've been on to Capes and Tights podcast to chat comics. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about Dakota. Like, how did you get? Obviously, you have a big Turtles love. If anybody follows you on Instagram and things like that, you do love the Ninja Turtles. Were you a comic book fan since young, or is this something you came into as a teenager? How did you get into reading comic books in the first place?
Well, there's been kind of an ebb and flow throughout my life. Some of the earliest comics were the Turtles Archie's comics, the cash register collections. They have those little digest versions. Every Archie does it, but they even did it with the Ninja Turtles line. So it was an early way to fall in love with the Turtles in a different way that wasn't the TV show and the toys, which I already loved. But that's where I met like the Mutanimals, where you get like Mondo Gecko, Ray Fillet, the whole the B cast that you don't really see so much in the show. Even like Casey Jones, you don't really see in the show necessarily. But on and off, my dad was a Marvel reader. My first comic was a reprint of Marvel Team Up Annual #6, which I have hanging on my wall. It is Marvel Tales featuring Spider-Man issue 247, and it went to 248 too since it was an annual. But it's like Spider-Man, Cloak and Dagger, the New Mutants. It's like this quintessential early 80s team up. Which is a little bit before my time. It was that was 83, I think the original print was. But somehow that came into my possession. Became obsessed with Cloak and Dagger because of that. Fell off for a few years, but then came back like in college, right around like House of M and Civil War. Like the big crossovers at Marvel really brought me back in. And there was like this from like Avengers Disassembled into, I think, probably around Secret Invasion. There was just like the original Secret Invasion, obviously. There was like this like long run of crossovers where it's like, hey, every few months here's this new crossover series for you to like catch up on the Marvel. Do that. Uh, trying my hardest to keep up with it throughout all the major world rebuildings and crossovers, both with Marvel and DC. Sometimes it gets you always kind of reset to one, so I feel you don't really miss anything if you miss too much.
Mhm.
Um, and they're doing a lot of good work with um, keeping the keeping the characters baseline, even though
Yeah,
there might be some changes along the line. Um, you might have like a Secret Empire where you have this Hydra version of Captain America, but a few months from now you're gonna have Steve Rogers back,
yeah,
or
yeah.
uh, in his role as Captain America, or some other uh, similar role. Um, but yeah,
That's yeah.
that's
I'm
my
glad.
comics history.
I'm glad you talked about Secret Invasion and Civil War and that era of comics because I feel like obviously we have in comic book industry there is a terminology
Mm,
for golden age and things like that. But like to me, the quote
yeah.
unquote golden age of comic books, especially in the Marvel industry, Marvel side of things, was that era of Civil War, Secret Invasion, House of M, all that stuff there. And
Hmm.
I'm part of a book club at my local comic book shop, and we read graphic novels or trade paperbacks every month. And when we have a new member, we're always like, "How did you get into comics?" And it's so funny how many people either like broke into comics in that day and age or
Yeah.
fell off of comics and came back to them in that. It was like at that period of time, I felt like Marvel could write the playbook on how to do a crossover. I feel like
Hmm.
more recently they've figured out a way to not do it so well, not badly,
Yeah.
but just like not as good as that was. Some of it had to do with creators and the writers they had on their
Mm.
roster at the time. But yeah, it was just kind of funny how many people were like, "Oh my god, that's what I fell in love with Marvel was the crossovers," and then they try to get them into it now. They're like, "Nope, I'm all set. I'm gonna go the indie route." And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
I can understand where you're coming from on that because that was to me like the epitome in my lifetime at 37 years old of Marvel comics. Those that day and
I think
age."
so too. I think, and I think they're trying to chase that rabbit still. Obviously, with they have Civil War two, and then they
Yeah.
had a new Secret Invasion, a new Secret Wars. They're taking that branding and trying to bring it back. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not a huge fan of having like if I want to say, hey, you should read Secret Wars. Usually, I
Yeah.
mean the original 70s series.
Yes.
But there's Secret Wars, and then there's Secret
Yeah.
War in the middle that Brian Michael Bendis like painted. I think it's Gabriel Dotto.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And Brian Michael Bendis. That's just gorgeous and kind of has the exact same plot as Civil War 2, honestly,
Yeah.
with the preventative measures and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I'm a sucker for a good crossover. And
Yeah.
and it, if it's like resetting the universe, that's always kind of fun too, because it feels like you're back at the beginning in a lot of
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe they might be doing that too much. Not they being just the industry in general, not one
Yeah.
publisher. Um, so many issue ones, but I get
Yes.
it. I completely understand why.
And it was a lot of titles in those things like secret Civil War all had these titles. There's like so many different like massive amounts of comics, but I felt like they all made sense, whereas I feel like nowadays with some of the big two they're like, oh,
Mm,
this book, we want this book to do well, so let's put it into the story of the main story arc crossover that's going on,
yeah.
even if it had nothing to do with what's going on. It's like they're just forcing some character into a story to make it so that their book connects to it, so hopefully it sells copies of the book. That's where I feel like
Yeah.
back into the early, not say early 2000s, but like 2008, 2009, right around there, it was like no, all the stories made sense. They went together, and they created some things like Frontlines is one of my favorite comic
Hmm.
books because like it
Oh
got a
yeah.
different perspective of things. Nowadays, it's like I don't know. There was like Thor comic books in absolute carnage, and I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why are you doing this? But I guess
Yeah, and kind of the inverse too. You'll see characters pop up in the major crossovers to have this moment.
yeah,
Like I'm reading Secret Empire again,
yeah,
and Mosaic shows up as a big moment that like saves the rebels essentially and gets his plan forward. But kind of had this limited run of comics, and I don't know if he's really been used since, at least not in that big a way. But it really, it, I love it though because it kind of dates it in a way. It really tells you um, who this character was at this time, what they were pushing, and what you know might have worked, might not have worked. Even
mhm,
like Infinity Gauntlet. There's a lot of Quasar.
Yes.
There's not a lot of Quasar anymore. Um, but it's wonderful just to see what they're trying and see again what might work, what might not work. But I think that's the fun of it.
Yes.
It never
Yes.
feels too gratuitous, I guess.
No.
Um, it's
I
just
just feel like some of those
you know,
creators also with some of these characters you mentioned, like Quasar, for example, like someone
mhm,
whoever, the creators behind the projects are like, we really like this character, so we want to use this
yeah,
character. Is that cool, Marvel? It's like if our friends over at Off Panel, if David Harper was in charge of things, he'd be like putting Stiltman in something, even if it didn't fit, because Stiltman's like his favorite character of all time. And it's like I feel like if you had the ability, if someone handed you the reins, okay, you're gonna write Captain America now,
yeah,
Dakota, you and your favorite character, some random character, you probably would try to find a way to put that character in your book. So like, I don't know how many different stories from Captain America I'm going to
yeah,
be able to tell, or Marvel books in general. So if I'm going to have this opportunity, let me toss as many of the characters that I want to write about in this book and see if it flies. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
yeah. At least one issue would be Captain America featuring the amazing slapstick. Definitely.
Well, that was, I think we had Pat and Oswald on with Jordan Bloom, and they were talking about their MODOK head games, about
Yeah.
MODOK series, the
Oh,
TV series,
fantastic.
and they wanted to like put a bunch of different characters in there, and
Mhm.
they're like, well, you can use these, you can't use these, and it was like starting to like put in their mind like, why can't I use these characters? You have plans for
Mhm.
these random ass characters in the future. Some of it's just because of
Yeah.
rights and all that stuff, obviously, but they wanted to do a series, their minor threat series. They wanted to do it originally with like at DC, and they wanted to use a bunch of like
Okay.
side character DC characters.
Mhm.
But actually they called it C-list characters. They were all going to be characters that started with C, which was really also kind of funny. Uh,
Oh, I like that.
they're like, oh yeah, a C-list, but also C-list. But they realized that all their DC's probably ever going to do is like, okay, when can we put the Joker in it? When can we put Batman in it? And they're like, no,
Yeah.
that's not what we want to do. We want to do something with all the side characters and not have any big characters in it. And they ended up creating minor threats over at Dark Horse instead and using made up character or their own made up characters instead.
Oh, it's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so which is pretty cool because I like that a little bit more. Because again, I do think that's what would happen. You'd see like maybe a 5 issue story arc, and then the sixth
Mhm.
issue is like Captain America's here, and it's like, wait,
Yeah.
you don't need Captain America in this book. It was doing well on its own. But
Yeah, and I,
ah,
and I get it. I get that like narrative synergy where
yes,
um comics is an industry where the businesses you're selling the cover, you're not selling the panels. 9 times out of 10, these books are going to be, wrapped on the shelves. And if you don't know the character or the story, you've got to have some kind of cover that really pulls in somebody. Like even I'm a huge Sandman fan, and they did a great marketing job with it in DC Comics at the time. And Dave McKean's covers are so beautiful, but it doesn't really tell you what is
Mhm.
inside these comics. So I always think about like, what if you know, um, late '80s DC Comics didn't advertise Sandman as it was. If you just saw these covers on the shelves, and I don't know if it would have done so well,
Yeah,
honestly,
hmm
or without the name of Neil Gaiman and Dave
yeah.
McKean on them, obviously.
Well, sometimes it
Um,
does a better job. It doesn't matter. You could literally write the most random comic
yeah.
book at all. Neil Gaiman wrote this. I'll pick it up then. I'll see what it's like.
Oh, I've done it. Yeah, I'll do it every time too.
It's
Um,
like it's
but
like
yeah,
Stephen King novels now, or big novels for any novel. It's like the name of the book is like this fine print at the bottom, but the name Stephen King is
mhm.
like this massive thing. It's gonna be the next phase. It's gonna be
Oh,
like Neil
definitely.
Gaiman, and it's gonna say like, or like whatever, whoever it may be, but it might be this massive name, and then it's like, okay, it's a Superman book or whatever.
And yeah,
But
I mean
it would
that's
probably
what it
work.
is,
It'd
though.
probably
It's
work very well.
yeah. Even as I don't do any art myself, but even as a writer, most of these anything I pitch isn't pitchable in my mind until, um, and even like pitchable to an artist until
Yeah.
there's like a cover idea in mind, or if there's something like a title that would sell it. Um, and I think that's just the state of the business, for better or worse. Maybe
It
it's
is. I'm an artist. I'm a graphic designer by trade, and one of
oh
those
cool.
things that I my main job is designing beer can labels for a brewery,
Oh,
and
nice.
so as much as I love the liquid of the beer that's in the
Yeah.
cans, I will say, and I always tell Cheese My Head Brewer and one of the owners that like the people likely picked this can off the shelf at the store because of what my artwork was, not because obviously they can't taste it yet. And it said it sucks that we always got taught as growing up, don't judge a book by its cover, but like that's literally what we do in the comic book industry, in the beer industry, in most industries. You literally look at something and go, that's probably cool, and then I'll pick it up and read it and so on and so forth. Like
especially
I go
with
to the
oh, sorry, go on.
I was at the bookstore this weekend with my wife, and I was like looking at the covers before I even looked at the description of the book. I'm like, no, I don't want to read that one. The book could be absolutely unbelievable, but the cover wasn't selling me on it. I was like, nah, next one.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. Like you can't really, at most places, you're not going to flip the book open and there's not going to be a synopsis or a solicitation of what the book comic is in a comic book shop. You know, it's just, you have to kind of like interpret what the story's going to be about by the cover.
Yeah. I know a few, I know Vault does that. Band of Bards does that, where you can flip to the back and see a synopsis, and fingers crossed that it's bagged and not board, so you can actually see that. Unfortunately, with Band of Bards, they also have a slip cover on it that retailers don't always remove. It's a protective cover that for shipping. It's not like a sketch cover or anything like that. It's just a protective white sleeve. So a lot of times you'll know what a Band of Bards book is on a shelf because there's just a white sleeve on it and you can't tell what it is inside. And that's been a fun battle, finding that at retailers and saying, "Hey, can we remove this white sleeve?"
Just be there. Yeah,
yeah. There's even instructions on it to remove. But yeah, those synopses, it's kind of a new thing in comics, honestly, because I mean the back was usually reserved for some kind of advertisement, whether internally or externally. But having those available kind of turns like the physical stores into what you kind of feel online too. Because online, Previews World, or if you're going to your favorite online retailer or direct from the publisher, which is the new direct market, honestly, you get those synopses and you see exactly what's going on in that issue. But I'm starting to see that more and more. Like I said, with Vault and Band of Bards, and hopefully they kind of follow suit, because that's kind of beneficial, especially with all these variant covers. You'll especially with Marvel is notorious for it, for having a variant cover that features a character that has nothing to do with
the show. I mean, the whole Spider-Man series. This whole I've had this argument in my LCS multiple times. So they're doing it's a Mickey Mouse Disney variant of Spider-Man, but they put Iron Man as not like in Amazing Spider-Man as you could put it in the Invincible Iron Man font if you wanted to, and just write Amazing Spider-Man, and people would still okay with that. But it literally says Invincible Iron Man. It's got a picture of Mickey Mouse dressed as Iron Man, but it's on Amazing Spider-Man number 35. And I'm like, how is that even helpful to anybody?
I don't know. I don't know who the audience is for that necessarily. If it was Mickey as Spider-Man, I completely get it. But even
Iron Man fans
too,
I mean, is it Iron Man fan only? I guess. I don't know, but if I was an Iron Man fan, I'd probably still be interested in the fact that I'm a big Scotty Young fan and I'm a big Walking Dead fan, and he just released the Walking Dead 20th anniversary variant of I Hate Fairyland, which is got Michonne on it, but really it's not Michonne. It's his own take on it.
Yeah.
But that to me, it said I Hate Fairyland. It didn't say Walking Dead on it. So as a Walking Dead fan, I'd probably still would buy this because it was an homage to a Walking Dead comic book. It doesn't have to say Walking Dead. That's the thing. I was I don't know where that could disconnect. Someone was no, we need to do this with Invincible Iron Man on the front of it. It was weird. But the synopsis that helps a lot.
It does, yeah. And I wonder often if there's just a backlog of covers that have to legally be used, and here's a slot for it. We'll insert it here. That's a bit cynical on my part, but it's just it's odd. But yeah, synopses are fantastic. But
some people don't like them though. Honestly, some people don't like the fact that they know a little bit more too much about the book itself. They'd rather just pick it up. But I'm also then just don't read it. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things that no one's forcing you to read the synopsis of the book that's being there. So just read it and go into it blind. That's awesome. I'm more apt to the idea of going to Previews World, or like you said, a publisher or your local comic book shop's website, and reading it so I have an idea when I open the first page of what I'm going to expect of some sorts. Twists and turns don't always land the same way if you don't know what the book was pitched to you as a certain way. So if you didn't know, Spider-Man was going to do this, that, and the other thing, and he ends up doing something else, it's well, wasn't expecting that anyway because I didn't know what the book was about. So there is that. I can also see that people not wanting to read it in a Spider-Man book because you kind of have an idea already who Spider-Man is and all that stuff. But like some of these independent books, I
Mhm.
need to know what's going on in
Yeah.
this book in general. And again, a lot of covers, I could think that with Death Comes from the Toymaker, like you kind of understand what the heck's going to go on. At least you show the two main characters on the cover. So there's
Yeah.
that aspect of it. So there's no, what you're going to expect on the inside of it. But before we get into that really quickly, so what made you want to
Yeah.
write comic books? We kind of dropped off and started talking about other things before we finished up your whole like origin story. But like, what made you decide to actually put pen to paper and want to write comics?
Well, I come from a theater background,
Okay.
uh, both training as an actor and as a writer. Had some plays published and produced, and had a lot of fun with it. And it's still something I'm very passionate about. It's a um, like it's a bit of a soul wrenching business theater. Um, because if you're not writing, the next big musical, the next thing that is going to go on tour, it's difficult to maintain that lifestyle financially, even with a secondary job, um, because the hours of like being involved in the rehearsal process, if it's a local production, um, or just workshopping it with actors, can be pretty grueling. But
Mhm.
again, it's something I'm still very passionate about. But it's a process I wanted to kind of take a break for from a while. And my wife discovered that Frederator Studios, the animation studios that did like Chalk Zone, Fairly Odd Parents, and recently Castlevania, um, and Adventure Time, just a litany of fantastic cartoons, that they had an open pitch policy. And I always wanted to write for animation, so I got some things together and started pitching to them. And over the years, ended up at Nickelodeon, Disney, Cartoon Network, and a few other places pitching animated series, um, through various writer strikes and
Mhm.
shifts of executives, which is you think it's crazy in the comic industry with executive shifts, but um, having to update my Rolodex, my proverbial
Yeah, bro.
Rolodex, it's just my email, um, for like animation executives. It's always interesting. Always have to introduce yourself again and again. But because of that, I ended up having this catalog of IPs ready to pitch, most of which were um, like for ages 7 to 11, which kind of
Mhm.
isn't a thing in comics. But um, after a few years of pitching to animation, seeing so much turnaround and so much um, lack of pulling in new creators, right now, especially with networks, it's a
Mhm.
um, existing catalog, uh, grindhouse kind of. We have Rugrats, let's do a new Rugrats. We have
Mhm.
these legacy characters, let's do something new with them, which completely understandable. And that's honestly where a lot of audience will come from.
Yeah.
Will just come from the past. Um, so I started looking into comics, but because issue by issue comics for like ages 7 to 11 really isn't that uh, prevalent at the moment. Really, just graphic novels like
Mhm.
Scholastic graphic, your Dogmans and your Mayor Good Boy and the like.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to get into the monthly issue by issue. So the first thing I looked at was like, hey, how do we at least create a cover that's somebody would want to buy first as a publisher, because I'm not great at the Indiegogos and the Kickstarter situations.
Yes.
Um, and second, that an audience would want to see would want to, readers would want to buy off the shelves. So I was thumbing through just public domain characters, and started developing this Santa Claus versus death pitch that ended up spiraling into something that was like more akin to American Gods, with all these multiple religions and deities.
Yeah.
But I eventually uh, I brought it down and condensed it so that the only you know um, exploration of uh, the deities was going to be this Babylonian pantheon, because it felt, one, that's where I wanted the creation myth that's involved in the story to come from, and two, there's kind of a lack of representation in these really fascinating pantheon of gods. Um, so it was a learning process throughout, and it started as this again, there's this Santa Claus versus Death, but ended up being a retelling and direct sequel of the Epic of Gilgamesh because of that. Um, that has this uh, it was just a very unexpected narrative at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Um, that was going to be like this 2 or 3 issue series, but I couldn't get it less than 6 issues. So here we are with the 6 issue series. Issue 1 is out, and the full trade paperback is coming out in March because we're skipping issues 2 through 6.
I was gonna say that was the question I had at some point we were talking about, but like it's a cool thing in my because the funny thing is I think that this actual model itself, like if people like full on plan to do this for like
Mhm.
everything, would actually somewhat work because it gives like it almost gives issue 1 as a pseudo ashcan or preview to
Yeah,
the series. It also those people who were addicted to number ones. You know what I mean? Like the idea of collecting, like so many people go out there and buy the number 1 issue and then don't even think about buying number 2. They just want that
yeah.
number 1 of an independent comic book that in the hopes that it's picked up or optioned or whatever you might want to think of. And but then a lot of people like wait, okay, oh, I like the series. I'm gonna wait till the trade comes out. And then you're not
Mhm.
wasting the time, the energy, and the money to putting in single issues out through 2 through 6. You're just like, fine, buy issue 1. If you like it, you can see the trade coming out in March 2024. Like I said, I'm a single issue guy. Like I
Yeah.
am we talked online, I think, about the idea of where is the rest of this book? When's it coming out? And you
Mhm.
mentioned that it's coming in a trade. And that I would like to have issues 2 through 6 on my shelf. However, I also have a more extensive now trade paperback shelves, so I can add it to my collection still.
Yeah.
But I do like that model in the sense that it gave it kind of an ash can preview. Like I know my
Yeah.
LCS owner will be buying the trade for stock on his shelf because you had this issue come out and he liked it. So
Oh, fantastic. Yeah,
yeah,
and that's kind of the I'm sure there's a litany of reasons. Obviously, one, financially,
it's yes,
it's a better investment for the publisher, for Scout. Um, and at first I was a little concerned because in my mind, you hear like issues 2 through 6 aren't going to shelves. That means there's like less profit in my hands. Why did I make these? But at the end of the day, you never know how those are going to go. I have a habit of buying issues 1, issues 2 and 3 maybe, and then
yeah,
falling off.
mm-hmm.
Either I didn't go to the comic book store, or it just slipped my mind, or issues 1 and 2 were on my read pile for too long, and it slipped my mind. But this kind of guarantees that like if issue 1 was enough to pull you in, hey, here's a whole series and it's ready to go. Um, in trade format. I'm curious to see how it's going to be, um, collected because we didn't have covers for because
Yeah,
we found out it was going to be done as a trade immediately after issue 1. We don't have covers necessarily for issues
yeah,
2 through 6, even though there are some, but they aren't official. But it's going to be yeah, all 124 pages. I think that's the count. Collected at once. It's interesting to have this like almost this barren desert feel of the rest of the issues, and then suddenly here's this oasis of water that is the full series coming out. That's how it feels like to me, as waiting, waiting, and waiting. But
yes.
honestly, it's not been a long wait by any means because it's this the
It's
program
I
is called
mean,
Nonstop.
yeah,
Yeah. Here's issue 1 in July, and I think there's been some uh, just the state of the industry with
yeah.
paper costs and the whatnot. It was a little bit longer than the typical nonstop release schedule, but um, yeah, we'll be able to solicit in January, maybe even late December, to get kind of a holiday feel to it.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm excited to get the whole thing in people's hands because issue 1 reads like its own thing, I think, but
Yeah.
the rest of the series is kind of, it really does feel like a graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's like like most comics, it's designed to have a last page that makes you go, "Ooh, I gotta read the next issue immediately." As long as the pages keep turning, that's the goal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
It's
hopefully,
I mentioned the ash can part of it, or the idea that it's like you get a preview towards it. It's one of the things that the toss ups people have that I've talked to about single issues versus trade or graphic novel. And one of them was like the longevity of marketing on a single
mm,
issue is longer. So like it builds up to that trade. So like excuse me. So like when you had like 6 issues that you could have 6 months per se of marketing a book, and then a couple months later you had the trade come out. You have an entire. But I still think this could work the same way.
Mhm.
Whereas we're talking about it now. I know other people have
Yeah.
talked about it. It's getting to that Christmas season, and my buddy Paul, who owns Galactic Comics in Bangor, Maine, had mentioned about like what are we going to read because we read a holiday book, or trying to read a holiday book around the season to like this. We're reading Naughty List
Yeah.
over there at Aftershock, but and then like James Tynion has his book coming out called The Deviant around holiday
Mhm.
season. And then but my personal thought was, oh, this is perfect. It comes out in March. It means we can plan reading Death Comes to the Toymaker for next November in our thing because it's coming out plenty in advance. You can get copies in, we can get them in our hands, we can read them, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's like for the holiday season, and like December 1st, the book's like the first issue comes in. I'm like, well, that doesn't give you much.
No.
It gives you the ability to read an issue of a book. It's a
Yeah.
holiday book, but it doesn't give you much to actually get into the actual season. You're reading the entire bulk thing in, March, which is okay because I
Yeah.
like Christmas and I like holidays. So that's not a problem with me. But this is it's a Christmas story, but or a holiday story, but not really in the sense that it's more of a underlying story to it in that sense. So it's like, it doesn't have to be read during Christmas.
Oh yeah, and that was
Yeah.
um it, it was an unintentional perk, I guess, of it that
Yeah.
it ends up being, like I said, this sequel to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where yeah, there's this backdrop of this holiday, which in this universe is called Ea's Day after the god Ea, who saved humanity from the Great Flood. Um, and it's takes place essentially over the course of one year, from one Ea's Day to the next. Um, but in that same sense, that is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Is it not a Christmas
Yes.
movie? Um, this is I mean, it very much, I guess, is an Ea's Day book, because
Yeah.
the title character is the Toymaker.
Yeah.
He's the Santa Claus of that universe, so it very much is. But I mean, I guarantee you, between like issues 2 and 5, it's probably kind of a forgotten thing,
Yeah.
because it's this big mythic quest with um, beasts of hell and chimeras and gods that have been forgotten by most modern standards, unfortunately, leading to this incredible battle that just happens to be um, around this holiday. Um, so yeah, it's hopefully it feels like it can be read year round in that
Yeah.
sense, but at the same time, it's nice to think of somebody saying, let's cozy up to the fire with some hot cocoa and some Death Comes for the Toymaker.
Exactly. Let's see how that works. I mean, like I said, and I've bought Christmas presents for people too, or holiday, presents for people in April, and just held on to
Oh
them
yeah.
too. So however, when you purchase this book, it's beneficial to Dakota and the team to purchase it. So like if you get it in March and you give it to someone for Christmas next year, it's a long way to wait. But like just just purchase it when it comes out. No, so is Ryan Cody doing all the artwork for a whole thing? I mean, obviously. So before we get into that, actually, I want to say is Joe
Yeah.
Picardo is one of my favorite horror and comic book artists that are out there right now. Joe finished the recount for our buddy Jonathan Hedrick. The past couple, like the last issue or two, was like he did
Mhm.
the last pages, and he also did Nightwalkers more recently with Cullen Bunn over at Source Point. And Joe is an
Oh
unbelievable
yeah.
artist. So having Joe as the cover of #1 was absolutely outstanding as well. But Ryan doing the interiors, Ryan Cody, is he doing the rest of them
Mhm.
too?
Yeah. So uh, from pitch to um, seeing it in Previews World, all art was done by Ryan.
Okay.
Um, Cover and every single panel, beginning to end, both line and inks and colors. And the day that it dropped in Previews World, I had trouble finding the comic, and then suddenly I see this cover from Joe Percato that I have not I had seen, but I didn't know it was going to be the A cover. Some things got shifted around at Scout, and uh, I wasn't made aware, but and not in a bad way. It was just a
Yeah.
surprise. I see this cover from Joe, and then the B cover from Marco Fontanilli, which is also just
Yes.
gorgeous. Um, and I'm sure they've been selling copies. Ryan's got a cover as well. That's
Yes.
the Scout headquarters exclusive, so you can buy it in stores in
Mhm.
Florida, but it's also online, um, which was part of the original pitch package. Um, but yeah, Scout had some big dreams with the variant covers. We've got Heather Ontos from who's an
Mm,
editor at IDW. She's
yep.
on our web store exclusive cover. That's just this really cool close up on Death with a little bitty
Yes.
Toymaker in the eye. Um, and then a few secret Whatnot exclusive covers that I think I can announce because I've seen them on eBay at least. One is a variant of Heather's cover, and the other is a very heavy metal cover by Hugo Petrus.
Hmm.
Um, which again, it's not been officially announced, but there is a copy on eBay, so somebody has won it in a Whatnot auction, so it's live and it's out there. Um, so it's
Yeah.
I guess
I mean,
announceable, but
if you Google whatnot, what comes to the Toymaker, the first thing comes up is the Hugo Petrus cover. So
okay,
it's like
yeah,
it is searchable.
okay, good. So I don't think I'm wrong for
Yeah.
announcing it. But yeah, the covers have been fantastic. Everybody has their favorites. I have a hard time choosing because they're all uh, my sweet babies. Um,
I don't know
but
if I
yeah,
like. I don't
Joe's.
know. I don't know if I like the Heather Antis one better. That's black and white, or the one that's in color.
Yeah, so the original one is probably my favorite because it's
Yeah.
I try to look at it as it pops off a shelf. That
Yeah, it
yellow,
does.
that
Yes, it does.
very
Yeah.
vibrant yellow, it makes you look at it. But of course the Whatnot cover isn't going to be in
Yeah.
stores. It's going to be just on
Yes, yeah.
Whatnot.
So
And there's a metal version of that one and a metal version of Hugo's that are there are 15 copies of each floating around. I have one of each, and I think some people have won them in the Whatnot auctions, um, which I've tried to get in on and be involved, but man, they go fast.
yeah,
Um,
I can
and
imagine.
it's something that I'm not very familiar with the whole live auction situation, but
Yes.
Scout has a huge fan base for that.
Yeah, and some people
Um,
just like that's what they do. It's like they're just their whatnot is just what they like. It's how they just make their money. And I just
yeah,
don't. To me, it's like I can't. I don't have the mental capacity to even like. I was my buddy Joseph Schmalke was at the local comic convention in the 13th to the 15th of October, and he was doing a live whatnot at the convention during a lull. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go screw with them. I'm gonna get on my phone, my son and the whatnot. Like I have the app in there. I'm like, now what do I do? Like, how do I find him? I'm like, wow, I'm 37 and I felt like I was 106 there trying to figure out how to use my phone for the first time. But I ended up giving up. I was like, no, I'm done. I'm moving on. But
yeah,
whatnot is cool in that sense. Like some people have that ability to just like cash in and the exclusives and stuff like that's really cool too. I think that's a cool market that we didn't see coming
yeah.
when whatnot was actually first started.
Yeah, and there's a big focus on it. I think the last time I joined one, I was doing it through mobile, and they said, "Oh, and the creator Dakota Brown is here. Let's say hi, Dakota." And I couldn't figure out how to say hi. I think I could type it, but I doubt there was a way for me to go
They
through
couldn't see where you were going. Hi, hi.
hello,
Can you not hear me?
hello,
Hi.
activate speech.
Siri, tell whatnot hi. But yeah, I mean it's kind of funny that I mentioned how much I like Joe's cover and stuff like that. That it technically
Mhm.
really wasn't so like wasn't the ideal or the original pitch for the cover for first issue. But like I said, it's cool to me, and it's one of those things that
Yeah.
if I didn't see, so I saw that I'm pretty good at reading my previews catalog and talk to my LCS
Mhm.
because I'm usually one of the ones that sometimes orders not the obscure things, but some of the just outside of what his normal customers might order. So a
Yeah.
lot of times I get a comic, but it's like literally they go through their orders that week and they're like, who ordered this? And it's usually just because I order it by my like I'm like, can you get me a copy of that book? And but both of us got the advanced email from Scout, I believe, because I get the emails for some reason if I wanted to do a variant cover. I get like
Oh,
the
nice.
variant program they have email, and then there's a little click, a small button towards the bottom that says read the entire story ahead of time so you can like decide whether or
Oh,
not you want to
nice.
do a variant. And so did he. So we read the book and we're like, oh my gosh, we're really excited about this book coming out and so on and so forth. And then I saw the Joe Picardo thing. So like to me, it still probably would have sold me on the fact that I love Joe's artwork so much that I would have been
Oh,
like,
yeah.
okay, I could pick this book up. I haven't seen or experienced much of Ryan's work, so it may not have done the same thing. So at least one customer potentially would have bought your book or did buy your book based on the fact that that cover was letter A.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I was thrilled to see it. It was just a bit of a surprise. I probably missed an email somewhere along the way, and it does sell the book with this really driving action, which a lot of people have told me looks like almost like it's like a dance fight. They're fighting, but it
Yeah.
almost looks like this choreographed dance almost, which kind of goes well with the history of the characters once
Yeah.
you really get into the story, because they've been fighting for a while, but before that they were much dearer friends in a
Yeah.
previous version of themselves.
I like the French, the battle of people who obviously who were at one point friends and had this disagreement and so on and so forth. But I also love the take on the fact that if you do see this as a holiday book or a holiday story, that it's not like people see holiday stories as happiness and joyful and families coming together and all this other stuff. But this is more not completely over the top dark, like a Rare Exports
Yeah.
style or those kind of movies or Krampus or anything like that. But it's like in the middle. So there's like obviously someone's trying to be happy but in the same sense, there's this darkness and death that's involved in it. The character death, obviously, but I mean like
Yeah.
physical actual death. That's like puts it in that middle, puts it in that like, oh, this is kind of a cool story that doesn't really sit with any other story that I've seen on the market right now, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of just pathos in general, and that's
Yeah.
I think probably just from a theater background. Um, but going through the history of these characters and as they existed in Babylonian times, um, and how to who they are now,
Mm-hmm.
um, the the clear through line was, yes, one character is being forced to do something he doesn't want to do. Yes, to steal souls for death.
Yeah.
Every Ea's day, and it's grating and destroying his own soul. Um, but at the crux of this it's a story about friendship. It's a story about lost opportunities and like simple choices that um, forced those lost opportunities. Honestly, it's a story about friendship and things unsaid and the simplicity of some of these problems we have internally with our peers that probably could just be solved with some dialogue,
Yes, it's a
but
conversation.
do end up leading to uh, giant wars with hell beasts and
Yeah.
and the like. So yeah, there's a lot of that the soft tender moments, but also these big epic
Yes.
battles that hopefully um, are a good juxtaposition to one another
Yes.
throughout the series. Um, and like I said, we see a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh and some other Babylonian stories, starting with issue 2 and going forward. But it's this big back and forth. It's like the cover, a dance
Mhm.
between Death and Gil, the Toymaker, um, and seeing where it leads them in their relationship and how it led them there. Um, Hopefully, it feels balanced. I think it does, but it's a lot of heavy feelings for a goofy comic about a Santa Claus analog character.
Yes, yes. Well, I do like the fact that I wrote in my notes here too that like the fact that it's you used public domain esque type characters like Santa
Mhm.
Claus and Death and things like that, but that using them specifically as who they, it's not like you pulled Snow White and use Snow White as Snow White. You
Yeah.
you you use a different variation of the same story in a sense. Because I think also it might have probably sold issue ones for you in the sense that someone just sees this cover and sees it's a Toymaker and they automatically
Mhm.
think Santa Claus and they see the Death as a character and you automatically think Death and this idea of like Grimm probably sold really well with the fact that there was a Reaper on the front of it and in
Yeah.
that book people are like, oh, I know that character, I want to deal with that character. But you didn't actually use like you didn't use like Santa Claus. Like the person's name is not Santa Claus, which is really
Mhm.
kind of cool. I'm reading Mave Fly right now by CJ Lee, the novel. It's a
Okay.
horror novel that just came out this year. But the characters she writes in the book that there's these this woman works at the happiest place in the world, and then obviously you started working this in your mind that
Yeah.
she works at Disney World or Disneyland, and but she can't use the character she plays at in the park is Elsa, but she can't say Elsa because Elsa isn't in the public domain. But she says characters that are in the public domain that Disney uses as characters, so that you can kind of like mix the two together and understand.
Oh,
Now
that's
you go,
cool.
okay, this is Disney. So they say Snow White and they say Cinderella, but they're not actually, because they can say those ones, but they couldn't say Elsa.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, this white blonde with a snowman as a friend or something like that. So you kind of could get the whole thing. And I was like, I appreciate that. It made me wanted to continue
Yeah.
reading, because it's like, now you're putting me in a position where I know what you're talking about, but then you're taking me out of that and putting it in a different story. Same thing with this. Like, you're giving me the idea that I know who Santa Claus is. He's a Toymaker as a character, and so on and so forth, and Death as a character, but that it's not specifically them, which helps me now fall into your lore, not the lore of Santa Claus. My chair is like,
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, it's I mean I mean, granted, it's a very similar holiday situation.
yeah,
Um, but throughout the series, we find out, how he got his special bag,
yeah,
and that ties into the story of Humbaba and the cedar forest. Um, we see that he doesn't have the traditional, 9 reindeer and a sleigh. He has instead a chimera. Uh, so it's hopefully there's enough there to really, scratch that Christmas itch, but enough to make you realize very different, um, at least in sense of the universe it exists in.
yeah, yes. And like I said, I've read issue 1, so I've obviously had the only 1/6 of the story. So it's nice to know that there's more to it, and I'm excited for that because, like I said, I'm a big fan of issue 1. I'm fit out of the artwork,
Okay.
your story, your writing ability is really great. For someone who obviously haven't read anything from you before. So that's really cool to have this and talk about this on the podcast. But you also have another series. I mean, before I finish, we want to move on to the other series really quickly before we wrap up here. But number 1 hit in July for this book. So, hopefully your LCS doesn't have it, because that means they sold out of all of them. But if they don't, or if they do, grab it on the shelf, because there's a possible that it got moved to some sort of back issue thing because it's been long enough, or check with Scout Direct, because Scout usually has some web store exclusive things like that as well. And I'm going to say check with Scout in your LCS first, and then go to eBay and things like that, because a lot of times you can get what they're selling on eBay for 3 or 4 times the price on someone's like direct website. So just like, I always want to give that forewarning to people. I've talked to Charles Soule and Ryan Brown about 8 Billion Genies, and someone was like buying $100 copies of signed copies of them that you could buy on Ryan Brown's website for $20. I'm like, you just go to the artist. Like, the artist has his own copies, and he's gonna make that money off of it, not some guy on eBay.
Yeah.
Nothing against eBay, but I'm just saying it's kind of funny on that. So check your LCS, because it's a possibility they have a B cover or some random issues. I don't even. It's possible you can still get it too. I don't know if they can still order it or not, but yeah.
I think to an extent. I know you can through Scout, and
yeah,
I think Scout can ship directly to
directly to
LCSs
your
as
LCS.
well
Yeah,
if there's enough of an order. But maybe not. They might just do it on their own too.
yeah. Do it on, and like I said, or I don't think Dakota would be pissed at you if you just waited for the trade to come out, because as long as you buy the trade, then you're happy to, because buy the trade. Hits the trade comes out in March, so you check that out. But you have Grandma Tilly's Helltech Mech. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
over at Band of Bards. I've heard really good things about Band of Bards. I'll tell you that thing right there.
Oh yeah.
So I'm glad it landed up there, because that's a pretty good people over there right now. But give a little synopsis on what that, or a little elevator pitch on what Grandma Tilly's is all about.
Yeah, so Grandma Tilly's Helltech Mech is a 3-issue series out from Band of Bards. The first issue came out in September. Um, issue 2 is November 1st, and issue 3 is December 20th. But it is about a gaming granny who breaks her controller in a fit of rage, calls a ride share, which is called Scooper in her world being Earth, but just a different version of Earth. But before her ride gets there, this giant metal mech-like thing comes down and lands at her yard. She thinks it's her ride. She crawls in. It ends up being this giant fleshy mech from a hell dimension that just shoots her into this adventure into space. Um, she thinks it's a fun video game because she can plug her controller right in and pilot it as if it was some kind of weird interactive video game. But she's actually doing some horrible things and she doesn't realize it.
That's amazing. That's it's funny. It's like that you mentioned not knowing what you're doing. It almost sounds like a small part of war games where they're playing the game online and they don't realize they're actually starting, like they're actually like arming nuclear weapons and they don't know that. But yeah, that's pretty funny. Was this I pitched one of those ones that you had that was like in the hopper and you just pitched it as a comic book instead of an animated show?
Yeah, it was. For a while it was a like a 5 minute short that doesn't have the hell dimension aspect to it.
Yeah.
It had more of like just a space fare to it. It was called the 5-star Scooper Bot because Scooper was the Uber of that world. Um, but then when I started like building my spec package portfolio, it became a Donald Duck short called The Last Ride Sharer, as a reference to The Last Starfighter because it has that like Last Starfighter vibe. But then I got with Lane Lloyd, who's the artist on this and also the co-creator. Um, and while this script did exist for a long time before I got with Lane and they sent it in a direction I couldn't have done on my own with this weird fleshy hell goop that's throughout the entire series. Lane has this style unlike anyone else's in comics right now. It's this like stretch and squish style, almost like you can see it animated on the page almost. You can see it like stretch and squish, and it has that like early, Fleischer animation or early Disney too. Um, but it's the only thing like it in comics right now. And I was so lucky to get with him before, this big exclusive contract comes their way because it's coming, I guarantee you. There's gonna be some weird stuff either at Image, DC, or Marvel from Lane, and I'm so excited about it. But yeah, we worked together to create this new version of the universe that involves this hell dimension, this interdimensional task force that's made up of scientists and government officials. Um, it's it doesn't have the pathos of Death Comes for the Toymaker in the best of ways, in that it's just a fun, weird sci-fi horror romp. We're kind of billing it as uh, Return of the Living Dead meets Last Starfighter. Honestly, it's got that weird horror humor and maturity with its grotesqueness, but it's also just got a lot of hopefully fast-paced, forward-moving fun that drives you through all three issues. Um, hopefully enough to see some more Grandma Tilly in the future too. Who knows?
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah. So the first issue debuted on September 27th, and the second issue comes out soon. Is that, am I right about that? Is that coming out?
Yeah, it's this Wednesday, November 1st.
Okay, yeah, November 1st. And then then issue 3 comes in December, I'm guessing.
Yeah, December 20th. Yeah, and if your local comic store is like one of mine locally, it's going to be on the shelves with a white cover. Just look where Grandma would be in the alphabetical listing, and that's it. I swear.
It's almost like it's like a naughty magazine or a nudie magazine where it's like got the cover on. It's like don't look in here. Don't don't look at this comic.
And honestly, it kind of I didn't realize it was a mature comic when I was writing it.
Really?
I thought it was so fun and quirky that we could get away with a PG-13, but apparently there's some contents that Band of Bards felt it deemed a mature rating. But the covers aren't mature; they're fine.
They're fine. Yeah, it's not there. Well, I was talking to Mike Henderson about Nailbiter, and he was like, the Nailbiter #1 cover has the Nailbiter like eating his fingers and like blood was spurting everywhere, and they're like, I don't know if we can use this comic cover. Like, I think we're gonna have to go a different route. And he was like working on a different cover, and they finally said, yeah, we'll do it. But nowadays, I'm like, you don't see covers like that nowadays. Like it's one of those things that people are very, very, very LCS oriented in the sense that like they ought to make sure it looks good. Like, it looks good on the shelf, but also that it's not that kids can see it. And that's one of those things that was the whole I hate Fairyland, I hate this place battle back and forth where it was supposed to be F this place with Kyle Starks, and they ended up like, it's probably not going to go very well, and the people won't be able to order it because of the fact that they don't want the swearing on the cover. And so so I can understand if maybe some mature content on the inside, but on the outside it should probably be a little bit easier for people to see.
Yeah, I would say it's between PG-13 and R, and I would say issue 2 probably skews closer to R, but there's still this like fine line between it. if it was drawn in a very, very realistic fashion, oh, by all means, it would be a
Yes.
mature. But I
Yes.
think, and maybe it's just in my mind because Lane's work lends so much to this fun quirkiness that feels almost childlike in nature in the best of
Yes.
ways. Um, Maybe I was just blinded by that.
Maybe it's because it started out like as a kid's cartoon, and you're like,
Probably. Yeah, I've
but
seen it from child to adult. I guess
yes.
very literally.
Well, that was the I'm like I said, I mentioned off the top, I was like I'm a big Scotty Young fan. That was like
Mhm.
his volume 2 of I Hate Fairyland has like naked dude like post teenager years of Gert and Gertrude, and she has like pubic hair and like arm hair. And I'm just like, wait, hold on a second. This is not the Gertrude I remember reading in I Hate Fairyland #1, where she's like a small child being sucked into fairyland. Now she's like this adult thing, and she was trying to like sleep with people, and I'm like, oh my god, what the heck just happened?
Oh, I've read the first issue and maybe the second one. I don't know if I've gotten that far yet.
But it's just like it's not like a big plot point, but I just say it's this is one of those weird things. I have a Gertrude tattoo, and
Oh wow.
I'm like, hey, this is the baby, this is the this is the innocent, and not really innocent because obviously she kills people, but like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, but like I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, I did not expect to like open up a page and be like, holy crap, what the heck did Scotty do? But hey, you know what? Kids grow up. That's what happens.
Oh
No.
yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome. That's two different books that like kind of have two different groups, but also could be a crossover in this, which is pretty cool. And you're at two different publishers, which is also very good because I have a big proponent of like loving to spread that love to different independent publishers because they can promote your books at the same time and not feel like they're over promoting Dakota Brown, which is pretty cool too. So that's it. And like I said, I've heard good things. Travis Gibb over there says that Band of Bards is great too. So
Oh yeah.
I'm glad
Yeah,
you
they're
ended up over at
fantastic.
Band of Bards too. That's amazing as well. So but yeah, that's pretty cool. You're like now you're in the world, man. Now you're in the comic book industry. Like you're fully in it now. Like, are you working on other stuff too? I'm guessing. Obviously, you can't talk about most of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. There's some pitches that are out there. One that's like a young adult fantasy pitch that kind of takes the the D&D cartoon from the 80s and kind of flips it on its head. But it's a bit of a hard sell because again, when publishers are looking for uh, young adult, typically if they are looking, they want a completed graphic novel, and it's just kind of difficult to do that independently before a contract is signed. But there are some other things in the works that are more in line with like the vibe of Toymaker, but hoping to get back eventually to the vibe of Grandma Tilly's, where it's just kind of
Yeah,
fun. In theory, I would like to just go back and forth between those two vibes because one's pretty heavy and one might be a bit too much fun. So having that balance and um, that diverse catalog out there, I think would be
that's
a lot of fun at least.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think you're doing great work. I'm excited to see more from you, and you know you
I
got
appreciate that.
you got our pull list for any books that you got coming out in the future. So I'm excited for that. And I'm obviously going to excited for you to come back on and pitch anything else to talk anything else you want on the podcast in the future. And I appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this one and talk to us about Death Comes to the Toymaker and Grandma Tilly's Hell-Tech Mech. Again, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. And follow Dakota. You're on social media, so you can look up. It's pretty easy to find you. Writer Dakota Brown on Instagram and Dakota on the X on the Twitters.
Yeah, the former Twitters is DUHCOATUH rights because I wanted to make it so easy on everybody.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Well,
but I'm sure if you search Dakota Brown,
yes, you
you'll
can.
find me. I'm sure.
That's what I'm always like. Am I telling people like, oh, pitch your social media? I'm like, literally just Google or just search the people.
Yeah,
Like just search the
I
person's
think so.
name and it's gonna come up. I promise you. And if it doesn't come up, which means they don't have it, that's fine. Move on, whatever.
I think
But
that's
like, yeah,
pretty
you're
fair. Yeah.
pretty sure that you could find it. Or go to Scout and look at the picture
Mhm.
of Don't Death Comes to the Toymaker. Usually they tag you in it, things like that. So you can find them online and out there too. But again, I really appreciate you taking the time out of the day to talk to us. Everybody grab the books when they're available. Check with your LCS so they can get them pre-ordered if they need to get them pre-ordered and so on. But yeah, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks so much.